Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Weisenberger, the editor and publisher of Modern Steel Construction, and I am here in Louisville at NASCC, the Steel Conference, specifically SafetyCon. We're going to talk about, guess what, safety. We'll get into the specifics a little bit more. Joining me is Wayne Kresap, who is the Director of Safety and Health with Iron Workers International, and Steve Davis is Director of Corporate Services with Williams Enterprises of Georgia. He's also a professor at Georgia Tech University. Again, we're talking about safety. Specifically, we're going to get into awareness, project safety and health requirements, and helmets. So thanks for joining me, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
So we can get into the specifics, and helmets is going to be a big part of this discussion, but let's start off with from a general standpoint. What are some of the current trends in safety and health for our industry right now?
Wayne, why don't you take that?
Yeah, so Jeff, some of the things that we're seeing when it comes to our membership and our signatory employers is that they're running into situations out on jobs where it's faster, bigger, faster, and more efficient, and so there's a big push for production, the quality obviously, and then there's a drive on safety. But safety is all great until we get behind schedule, and then as that schedule gets compressed, then we start getting more trade stacking and everybody working on top of each other, and that's when the safety issues really start to pop up.
Yeah, and we're seeing that happen really all the way across all of the construction projects across the country. More focus we see a lot on the data centers, where we see a lot of accelerated schedules that occur there. And it's the trade stacking issue and the SIMOPS that occurs because of that. We got simultaneous subcontractors on top of each other doing work, and that can be a real issue for a lot of things.
And to piggyback on that too is also then the challenges that come in, because a lot of these data centers and a lot of these other battery plants, things like that, are often design build.
Sure.
And so as the project is changing constantly, not only just with the daily work that's taking place, but now you got these change orders that continue to come in, and that can lead to a lot of frustration with the men and women in the field. Because that weld that they put in yesterday now is going to have to get cut out, and they might have to put it over 18 inches. And it's a different attitude when you're working in those type of environments.
Right, and then obviously safety, like regardless of how fast people want things, I mean, it still has to be a priority. So how, what's the? I mean, and obviously the consequences can be severe when you start really pushing things a little too quickly. How do you even when you've got an accelerated schedule like that, how do you keep people, keep safety at top of mind?
I think a lot of it is trying to drive into the professional attitude of the craft person, and getting them done. Hey, you're still paid by the hour, right. So that is first and foremost. And then as that schedule continues to get pushed and it gets a little more compressed, is that reminder. We'll always find time after something bad happens.
Sure.
We'll find all sorts of time to fix it and take care of it then. And but it also means that a lot of our contractors are also going to have to stick to their guns on some of those kind of issues when it comes to the demands of the pressure of the schedule to get equipment in and out and keep things moving.
Well, the problem is not going to go away. No. And that was the point that I made in Denver when we did schedule versus safety, that it's not going to disappear. The accelerated schedule is a reality of today's construction world, and the safety issues that follow that are also a reality. It requires employers to manage it, and then put a stake in the ground as far as hours are concerned. Also be able to be flexible on flex schedules that multiple crews that will start at different times, and with the intent of giving them the requisite time to rest and recover that they need and be productive, because that's a big deal. But the stacking of the trades is going to always continue, and because of that, the overhead issues and overhead protection issues become paramount, because everyone's working on top of each other. The dropped object issues are not going to go away, no matter how much you want to tether anything.
Thank you.
That's still going to happen. You can't tether A325 or A490 bolts. I'm sorry, you've got to put those in. So there's a lot of issues that arise from overhead issues. And the GCs tend not to police workers under the erection zone, which is a violation of subpart R. So that's one of the issues we have to address. But the overhead protection issue is a big deal.
Yeah, and you know, Steve, you know, something else you mentioned is with that schedule as well is, you know, we're starting to see more and more states getting into heat illness standards. And a lot of the motivation behind that is also adjusting schedules to plan for heat and the high heat of the day. So you might have earlier schedules that may not have thought of 6 months or a year ahead when you were bidding that work. And as you're thinking about how that is going to impact the men and women in the field. And, you know, we don't always have that luxury of being able to pick and choose when that right time is going to take place.
We've actually had some of our crews start at 2 a.m. in the morning, and just to stay out of the heat.
Sure.
We had one project in Arizona that they said they were not going to do night shift, and about May 1st, they went to night shift, and we were reporting for work at 11 p.m. at night just to stay out of the heat. There was no way you could actually physically touch the metal during the day. So the heat standards that are currently in Maryland and California and Oregon, we expect that to expand actually out into the state plan states. We don't know exactly how the federal standard is going to proceed in the rulemaking process, which I have to watch for that. But these are all things that we have to address on the safety side. Those are some of the emerging issues. The schedule, the heat standards, you know, the PPE things that come up. A lot of these things are just commingled. They don't separate from each other. We have to address them all.
But it also leads up to a lot of frustration then, because
Yes, it
these
does.
things are constantly changing. And I think, you know, you hit the PPE side of that. You know, you have these, and like you said, the generals have a tendency to pick, this is what we're going to do at the beginning of the job, and then it gets enforced, and then all of a sudden something changes. Maybe there's an instance or some kind of an occurrence happens on the job, and now that policy is a shift, and then that changes, and now everybody has to adjust again. And it can be really challenging when you think you've got it to have to change horses again.
Exactly.
And so you bring up I want to touch on the heat illness thing for a second. You know, seasons change, right? I mean, obviously seasons change, but I mean, like seasons, like extreme temperatures are becoming, maybe like the summer is becoming a little longer in some places, or maybe places that didn't have extreme temperature extremes, maybe they're going to start having them. And I know, you know, if everything's kind of, when it comes to heat and illness and that sort of thing, it's more on a regional basis. But I mean, is there like any anticipation of, like, let's say a place that doesn't get a lot of hot weather, when they do have a heat wave, I mean, they're not used to working out there in that sort of weather. I mean, how is that sort of thing addressed?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's just, you know, physiologically with the human body, it has to be able to get rid of and dissipate heat just naturally anyway. And as we work, that's part of the training that has to go into it, is educating people on how to take care of themselves and their bodies and what they're hydrating and everything. And then from that point, the acclimatization period is also a big deal, to give people the time to kind of fit into that heat wave or to that period of heat. And it's a different heat in different parts of the country.
Yeah.
Totally different.
So, you know, like Steve was talking about being out in Arizona with that dry desert heat, and then you get down into Louisiana and the southern states with all that humidity in it, it could be miserable for people.
It's true. And I had a friend out in Arizona who said, but it's a dry heat. And I said, okay, you want an example of dry heat? Turn your oven on. Stick your head in it. All right, can you tolerate that? And it's
No.
so. And then you step into into the southeastern United States, and the humidity can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
The reality on the acclimation, I've been an endurance athlete for a number of years, and that is a specific function of each individual human body. You can't standardize acclimation.
Right.
So that becomes an issue. You may have some people that would acclimate quite easily, and others that may not ever acclimate. Their body just isn't able to actually dissipate the heat. So it's a tough thing to deal with. And honestly, the last thing you want to do, which is a lot of things that a lot of the standards is they want, especially the data centers, I'm not picking on them, but it just seems to be this trend that they will throw PPE all over the worker,
Yep.
which adds to the
Adds
heat
to
load and adds to the problem, then that's the last piece you should use to remove a hazard from a worker is PPE. You always go to engineering controls, administrative controls before you get to hanging on all kinds of PPE on a person. But that's another issue. But if we can somehow get to an agreement that these are the standard PPEs that iron workers need to use in our steel industry and in fabrication, and the hazard sets are pretty common, then we get agreement with that, and we get agreement with this is the best one to use for this trade, then I think we're going to be a lot more successful.
Agreed. We've been trying to work with a lot of these things with our members. Iron workers. I never had to fight an iron worker about wearing the hard hat.
No.
Never. That was pretty much standard to the trade. But if you think about building construction, bridge construction, industrial construction, and you think of a construction worker, what is the image that you typically see? You see, usually it's an iron worker with their hard hat
Right.
and everything.
It's
That's
an
in the
iconic
foreground.
image.
It's an iconic
Yeah.
image of what you would see associated with construction.
Correct.
And so, what I think what our challenge is now is we're at a point where I use the analogy of like the 1917 U.S. World War II doughboy. That's the soldier of the last century, and now and the iron worker of 1917 should look nothing like the iron worker of today as far as the equipment. Just the same as the soldier of today is not going to have the same type of equipment that they were wearing back in 1917.
Yeah.
So, we just need to find what is that look for the iron worker of today as far as the type of personal protective equipment and what that iconic look is. And that's going to be different. And we need to figure out a way to get our membership to embrace what that is going to be and be proud of it and to show it off and to lead the way.
Right.
Yeah.
And when it comes to like newer requirements, you make a good point. It's no problem to get somebody to wear a hard hat, but moving forward with new requirements, is it a challenge? It's like now there used to be no seatbelts. We all wear seatbelts now. I mean, it's ingrained on our heads. Maybe we don't do it, but we know we're supposed to. Is it like with whatever new requirements come along? Do you think it's going to be a challenge? Because I've already got my hard hat. I've been doing this forever. Now you want me to do something else? Is it a challenge to get people to adapt to new requirements? And also, I would imagine it would be a little more challenging for the seasoned professionals rather than the young ones, because the people who are getting in early, they're coming in kind of green.
Yeah,
and
they don't know any different.
Yeah,
right?
they'll do more what you tell them to, so to speak. So
No, yeah.
Well,
Go
all
ahead,
right.
Steve.
Reality.
Maybe, I don't know.
And Wayne is much the same. He's been around iron workers for a long time, me over 40 years. And what a lot of people don't realize is, one, iron workers are very proud of their ability to do what they do. And one of the conversations I've always had with them when they're like, well, why is safety focusing on us? Because they can't believe you do what you do every day. They look at where you are. But there's another dynamic. The hard hats for iron workers are part of their image. The stickers that they have accumulated over many years of time are part of their image. And it's part of that image that you just envision in your mind what an iron worker looks like. I remember being, believe it or not, on a subway in New York on the 4 train, and in the afternoon, and an iron worker stepped on to the train, full gear. He was coming off of work, and everybody looked at him. They knew instantly what he was.
Right.
He's an iron worker, and they look at that hat, and they know that's that image that the iron workers have lived with as long as I can remember. So getting them to change is a tough one. Wayne, you know that.
Oh, yeah.
And then getting them to accept some of the new, better technologies that are out there, just the SRLs, which has become the norm out there now, what it used to be. I remember when belts were there. That's what everybody used. I remember when nobody tied off, really.
You were a chicken if you had that, if you ever
Exactly.
hooked up with that belt, too.
Exactly. And I've seen iron workers with their feet dangling off the edge of the building, welding downhand on bent plate, and they're not tied off at all. 49 stories in the air, that's the old days. That's not today. So I agree with you, Wayne. The issue is change. No one loves change at all. In fact, they'll push back on it almost every time, unless, it's just like with your children and your grandchildren, you have to explain this is why. And it has to make sense.
100%.
Because if you try to explain it to them and it doesn't make sense, you're going to have a problem. So overcoming the change is one thing, and I think for us as an industry segment, we've got to understand what's the best one to use and then sell it to everybody.
Steve, I'm glad you mentioned the why, right? Because they don't understand the why. And that's part of the challenge that we've had in these conversions to like the new style of hard hats, because they're just being told, you will, you must, you shall. And they're not explained that it's a different type of head protection. The type 1 that we've been wearing for the last 60, 70 years only protects from impact from the top of the head. And the type 2s that are out there are the EN 12492. The problem is they just look so different, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't look anything like our traditional type of head protection. So, that type 2 that they're wearing now not only protects from the top, but also from the front and the back and the sides. So it has a wider area of protection, but they're not explained that. They're just told, you will, you shall, you must. Right. And that, telling somebody like that is not going to get buy-in.
Right. No, especially with, like you're saying, like the whole identity as an iron worker, like when you have there's plenty of different personalities out there, but I think there's probably, like, if you look at a bell curve, your average iron worker, like you said, they're proud of it. They that's part of their identity, and there's a toughness involved with it. Yes. And so if you're saying change, I can see some pushback
and
without
Steve,
giving a why.
Yeah, you could probably jump back into the historical side of the bridge hat, right? The full brim. So it was a rite of passage as an iron worker that if you made up to and you achieved the status of a foreman, you were presented with that bridge hat, that full brim hat, and that was something that was almost passed down from generation to generation. If you had multiple generations of iron workers in your family, that this was my dad's or this was my granddad's, and they were proud of that.
That passed that fiber metal hard hat down, and that was also fully recognizable. You could step into a steel erection job and you could look around and you could identify the foremans and the supervision because they had achieved that status. And you could see it because that's what they look like, and they look different than the other ones. So that identity piece is a big deal. All right, so how do we make the change? And should we? Now that's the other question, is you shall, you will, this is our mandate, which is stepping out of their ability that they should do. And the issue there is that it's very clear in the OSHA standards, in the PPE standards, who is responsible for doing the hazard assessments, for determining the necessary PPE, for providing it to the employees, to ensure that they're properly using it, properly training it, and maintaining it. That's the basic law. General contractors and owners in certain industry segments have decided to put themselves in that position, and that's a problem because they're stepping into an area that they legally should have an issue doing, is directing the means and methods of any contractor or any subcontractor.
Absolutely.
So that presents an issue. So I think what the industry should consider is getting together and performing pretty much a global hazard assessment for the types of exposures that iron workers have, and then select, based on that, say this is the best product, the best piece of PPE to allow them to perform their work safely without creating a greater hazard, and that allows the use of the face shields and the welding helmets so that you're not having to remove them to put on another one in the middle of the job, which creates another issue. So I think it's incumbent on the industry to do that work, to make that case, but you're going to have to do it with a team of people with some horsepower that can sit down with the powers that be and say, all right, this is what we have done. This is what the necessary PPE for our workers to be safe and productive to be able to do their work. If that doesn't seem to match with what's being required, then we, as an industry, need to approach the manufacturers and say, this is what we need. You've got this, but it doesn't allow us to use our face shields, and it doesn't allow us to use our welding helmets like the fiber metal helmets have done. And if we're not allowed to use that, if this product doesn't satisfy that, it's not the right product.
Steve, you nailed that, and so let me jump on a couple of things there. Steve's discussion on the greater hazard is a challenge for us. So the greater hazard analogy, is, and especially when it comes to the head protection, is, well, who did the hazard assessment? Now you have companies that are out there. You have OSHA. Federal OSHA came out and said, hey, we've looked at this. We're buying all new Type 2 headgear for all of our compliance, safety, and health officers. Great. What is your hazard assessment? Well, we did a hazard assessment. Okay, great. So you did it, but now everybody is pushing it on. They want to just shove it all down the rest of the construction industry's throat. So, the greater hazard problem that we run into is, and Steve touched on it, a lot of times our welders, the issue is that the technology with these new style of headgear hasn't quite caught up.
No.
And the other issue is that it's proprietary. It's like the old Sony camcorder having to have a memory stick when everybody else was on an SD card.
Right.
And so you were locked into their product. So if I had a certain brand, I had to use their clips, their attachments, and their face shield. And that face shield is about $60 compared to a $3 face shield that I can buy and use on my traditional Halo. So it creates and it's going to do the same thing. Maybe even the old one, probably even better because it was still made to ANSI standards, while these, who knows what they're being made to and tested to, which is a whole nother conversation.
That's an issue because the incorporated reference standards that sit in 1910.6 are very specific. And it's interesting that somehow they've decided to just skirt around those and ignore them, that 89 is there and it always has been there, and said this is the standard that you must ensure that your overhead protection hardware protects you from, too. They just ignored it because the new type of Type 2 helmets do not comply with that standard, and that's an issue. So I think, again, we're going to have to do some work.
So if I could, if I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
go.
off there, Steve, but so one of our big issues with our welders is they have their old stuff. The new stuff isn't available quite yet. It has the attachments, so they have to literally wear the new stuff out to their work location, take off that headgear, put on their traditional ironworker hard hat with their welding hood, and then do their work. And then when they go to leave that work position, take that helmet off and go put the other one back on and go. So that's when Steve's talking about a greater hazard, it's like, well, wait a second, all this time. And then you sit there and go, well, if they're doing welding and their welding activities, why aren't we putting them in a PAPR and we're protecting their eyes, their face, their ears, and their lungs all at one time? And they're people, well, wait a minute. Well, no, we just want to wear in that Type 2 hard hat, so it's...
They're ignoring
all the other issues.
Yeah, and again, that's why I think it's incumbent on us as an industry to do this work and to come back to them and say, here's our hazard assessment as an industry. This is our selected. Does your PPE match that requirement? If it does not, we got a problem. So we're going to have to solve this.
So something that the ironworkers are doing, and our safety and health department, we've worked really hard on trying to get connected with a lot of the new manufacturers, because a lot of this stuff came from Europe. It was made to a mountaineering helmet standard, EN 12492.
Right.
And that's what kind of started to matriculate into the United States. The problem is that EN 12492 standard does not match the ANSI Z89.1 that Steve was referencing. And so that's where we have some disconnect, because that was made for mountaineering climbing, mountain climbing, not for industrial construction or construction activities. So what we've been doing in our department is we've actually started reaching out to manufacturers. We've also been reaching out to our membership and our contractors, and we've conducted a number of different surveys. In fact, this latest edition of our magazine, we have a survey that's lined up in there with a QR code. And what we're taking is we're taking all of that information and we're putting it together in some charts, and we're sharing that willingly with the manufacturers. So now it's just not Wayne and the ironworkers or just our safety department. This is an industry issue. It's bigger than that, and trying to explain to the manufacturers, look, work with us. Help us design the iconic look, the next iconic look of the ironworker that meets all of these criteria that gives us the look, the accessibility, all the different accessories and attachments that'll work for it, and that people are going to want to wear instead of being forced to wear.
Sure.
Exactly. It's going to be a change. Let's make it a successful change. I mean, so that the work that you're doing is great. We're going to have to provide that information, and then, quite frankly, we're going to have to sell it because we're going to have to explain it to all of these parties that are deciding to implement this and say, you will,
Right.
but we agree with you, but here's the alternative that fits the requirements of what we need, and we respectfully ask you to accept this, and because it's exactly what is our requirement.
And the test, and and I probably should back up a little bit too. The other issue that comes in with these type 2s that we haven't talked about is the chin strap. And the use of the chin strap is, the whole concept is if somebody were to slip and fall or they happen to fall, usually the first thing that goes is your hard hat.
Your cover goes.
So by having that chin strap fastened on, then it helps keep it in place. So if you happen to strike your head on the secondary fall, hitting something else, that you're more likely to survive because you didn't suffer any kind of a traumatic brain injury as a result of that impact.
And that's a good thing.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah,
Right.
it's the reason why they're used in rock climbing. I mean, I've got a picture on my phone of my daughter is a rock climber, it's a very good one. And she's up on the cliffs in New York, and there she is because she's on lead, and she is in this exact helmet. That's what they use.
Right, and that kind of brings up the question. I guess this is like the why part of it, but let's back up just a touch. When it comes to the conversion between these Type 1 and Type 2 helmets, what was the genesis? Like, what was the impetus to make this change?
Oh, boy,
Was it the chin strap the big part of it?
The chin strap was a part, but the data, the insurance industry. This is going to be ugly, right? But that's the truth. Is the insurance industry was looking into this. People who survived falls oftentimes suffered some sort of a brain injury as a result of that fall, and they're paying on a lot of maintenance for that individual over the course of the remainder of their lifetime, that they're not exactly the same person again. And I don't want to blame just the insurance industry on it, but that's a big part of it. And you see the numbers and the data that comes out on that it is a problem. So what can we do to help try to mitigate that instead of doing our hazard assessment and preventing the fall in the first place or doing these other things? Let's just put everybody in this Type 2 helmet with a chin strap.
Yeah. We're going to the least effective of the methods to protect the worker. We just migrate to that. So I think we've got a lot of work to do with this. Can it succeed? Yes. We can definitely do this, but we're going to have to get the manufacturers to step up and provide a product that provides the necessary PPE for the iron workers. That's the requirement.
And Steve, you mentioned like the standards, right? The Z89 and the testing. And this is another issue that we have. Again, a lot of these companies are seeing a new market. And so there are a lot of startups that have just flooded the market with product.
Sure.
And they don't even know what they're getting into in a lot of cases. So you're seeing, different liners in them that are designed for brain protection, which is great, which is in a lot of motorcycle, biking, other types of head protection,
Right.
But it's new for the construction market. The other part of that is the testing that's being done. They're not testing it or sending it to a laboratory that's a third party to test that product that has no ties to it. They're testing it in their own laboratories and then self-certifying that it meets whatever requirements that they're testing it to.
Okay.
So
You're not compliant with the standard.
You're not compliant with the standard, but then also if something happens to that individual, how did you make the choice of that type of head protection? Where did you come up with making this and putting this on somebody's head, and now they might be not the same person after suffering an injury?
Well, that brings in a whole different other one, and that is the issue that unfortunately we may head toward if this current directive continues, because that scenario will happen at a point. And when that question arises in the legal process and the answer comes back, this other person directed us to use it, that should be an interesting case, and it's going to happen. So it's really would be a smart thing for all parties here The companies, whether they're owners or GCs that are mandating this use, need to understand the realities. We need to do our job with our global hazard assessment and then working with the manufacturers that says this is what we need and you need to accept that, and here are the reasons why you need to accept it, and here are the legal issues you might face if you don't, and get it on the record and win the game. I mean, we're going to have to do our work to make this work. And I agree with you. Let's build the next iconic ironworkers look so we can succeed on both ways. We can satisfy the type 2 good things, because there are good things about them, and also satisfy those things that were in our type 1s.
Exactly.
So I think we can win it, but we've got some work to do.
And I'll draw another analogy, with a lot of these site requirements, we get 100% gloves as well. And that's the same
Same
issues, isn't it, Steve? Where
Yes.
Now you have to have 100% hand protection on the job site. Well, what's an employer going to buy? They're being told they have to buy something with an ANSI cut rating of A4 or A5, and then they give them out to everybody. So usually it's some kind of a dipped glove. But now if Jeff, you take that glove and you're going to do another work activity, that's beyond just walking around the job site, is that really the right type of hand protection for you when you're setting a column or you're connecting or you're doing welding activity? That's not the right glove when you're welding or doing anything else.
That's why, and I'm not.
Again, it's got
not
to be task-based, right?
right,
Hazard-based.
And that's why Best Gloves has a guide that basically says, based on this work, it's an app. They have an app. I'm not endorsing them, but it's been widely used for years. If you're doing this, use this glove. If you're doing this, use this glove. It's incumbent on the employers to do their work with their hazard assessment and go, no, that's not going to work for us. That doesn't have sufficient dexterity for us to do our work. Or if you use that glove with synthetic material in a welding activity, you want to pay for that burn, because when it melts,
That's right.
then you're going to have a real serious burn. And we've seen that in the industry segment before.
That's something else that we're also trying to do, is we're trying to work with glove manufacturers. We have a matrix of ironworker specific tasks. And so what we're trying to do is take that task, identify the different types of gloves that best fit that for cold weather, for warm weather, and then put a guideline out, not directing, not means and methods,
Nope.
but here's a basic guide. And then it doesn't matter who you're buying your product from, as long as it meets some of those minimum criteria. At least you have the best chance of doing it. Because laying down decking is a whole other separate hazard.
Totally.
That when you're dealing with a cut resistance. So
Yeah, and it seems like, just from a layman's perspective, obviously, when it comes to like the helmets, like it's much more of it's much more cumbersome to have to change helmets. With gloves, it's obviously just a lot easier.
right.
You have a little more time.
A
You have
little bit more to do with it, but
Right.
but the work activities are all the same.
Right,
And so
right.
what we're trying to tackle with the gloves is something that, if we have that and we have the matrix based on the activity, then we can switch that over for head protection. We can switch it over for eye protection, face protection, hearing protection, respiratory protection. It all kind of goes along the line. So we've got different things that you can churn out. But again, to Steve's point earlier, that's a last resort, right? It's personal protective equipment. I think that's the other thing that we miss. It's personal. It has to fit the user.
Right.
It has to be the right size. It has to be the right style, and it has to be made to be and used for the exact hazard that we're protecting them against.
And I remember, and this is going way back in time, before everybody wore vests. Wayne, you're old enough to remember that. Nobody used those, and then suddenly it was required, of course, just when grading was going on, so you'd be visible to those equipment operators. And then it was like, well, everybody needs to wear them. Well, how about we put something on an iron worker that's a welder that will actually melt and burn? I don't think so. And that was an interesting dance when we went through that. I'm like, no, you can't use that, because the manufacturers had not learned we need to make an FR vest,
Yep.
which then they caught up. Well, we're in that same boat with the helmets. We're going to have to work with the manufacturers to let them catch up, so that we can actually have a product that will properly protect them and allow them to do their work and not put them in a greater hazard condition. And that's the game we've got to do.
what is the timeline on that conversion?
For change, oh boy,
Get into the manufacturing and design pipeline and get them ANSI compliant?
I guess where are we now, though?
Yeah, well,
talking
so
years.
now, yeah, we're
Gotcha.
years, right? So, you know, people want it now because they want to be able to use these things. Some of the manufacturers have been a little more open with us on working with us on being able to go back and use our traditional Halo adapters. They've come up with some of the manufacturers with their specific product. They've gone to the different welding hood manufacturers, and they've identified the main make and model of welding hood that is most predominantly sold, whether it's through Lincoln, Miller, Hobart, Jackson. And what they're doing is, as part of their package, when they sell that type 2 head protection, there's a set of adapters that are in there that will work for those 4 main types of brands, makes, and models. So they're trying to come up with systems. And again, but it still doesn't quite give us the look. So some of them are coming up with some other different looks. But the other issue is, for the iron workers, we're international. We have men and women that work in the United States and also in Canada. And the problem that we run into now is when you go north of the 49th parallel, we have Canadian safety standards that have to be met. So the ANSI standards work here for the States. They don't work up in Canada because they have a different set of rules, and their criteria for head protection is a little bit different. They actually, inside of the helmet or the head protection, has a larger buffer zone than what's required in the United States. So it's frustrating because I'm like, just make it to the worst case scenario and give it to everybody. And we're done.
But all you got to do is go across the bridge in Detroit, and then you're under a different set of standards.
You can't wear that hat. And that's what's happening. So you have manufacturers now that have made different SKUs for what they sell in the States and what they sell in Canada. And but I also have some manufacturers that are like, yeah, well, that doesn't make any sense. We're just going to stay with one product line. This is what it's going to be. And it might look a little different for folks here in the States that you might not be used to because it's going to sit a little higher on the head, but it meets their Canadian safety standards.
Yeah.
So.
Now, what we are finding, and through the initiative from certain iron workers, one of ours came into the office about 2 weeks ago, and he had found one that would work because they had the adapters with his face shield. He said it won't work with a welding helmet yet, but he showed us in the office and said, look, I can clip this one on, and there it went because he had the adapters for it. So the industry is moving, albeit molasses slow, but they need to move a little bit quicker.
Right, but the other thing that we need to understand with that too is like that face shield, the style of the head protection is typically more like the alpine style or a hockey mask or a bicycle helmet. So what is it? It's sitting really close to the face. So if I put a face shield over it and I'm doing welding activity, or a welding hood over it and I'm doing welding activity, because of the profile, I can't fit a respirator underneath that.
No.
And that's another problem. And so the manufacturers aren't, we're trying to work with them to understand the importance of being able to use the respiratory protection under it.
Yeah, because both the N95s, N99s, and then the P100s low profiles, none of those will work underneath it. That's another problem. So if they're in a situation where they are welding stainless, which they would need to do, in a lot of cases, if you're in the plume, you're going to have to be wearing protection. Most of the industrial hygiene surveys have borne that out, that you're going to have to wear it. Well, those are not compatible. You can't get any of those 3, which are the 3 most common, to be used for hex chrome or welding fumes as a whole, iron oxide. You're still not going to have that ability to be able to wear your requisite protection.
So what about awareness? So what are you all doing to kind of raise awareness of this? I mean, it's a lot to take in. When we, this has been very educational. There's a lot more involved than I thought. I thought it's very easy to go from one helmet to another. Obviously, it's not.
Jeff, I guess I laugh about it, but I never thought in my career as a safety person, especially in the year 2025, that I would ever be talking and dealing this much about head protection, about helmets.
Right.
And yet here we are. So, yeah.
Of all the trades that wore them, and wore them consistently, and wore them standard, the iron worker, even when they leave the project, they're wearing them. This group honestly is proud of their PPE, and they use it, and they take care of it because it's part of their image. I agree with Wayne. It's interesting that we've reached this point that we're having to argue about something that we've been a leader in using for years, because we have the greatest hazard on the project for overhead.
Exactly.
That's it. The greatest.
It's all big. It's all heavy.
It's all heavy.
Sure.
And watch how fast a bolt and how much damage a bolt can do at 30 stories. It can make a mess.
Oh, yeah.
Quite well. So those hard hats have protected our industry segment for years. So it's interesting that we're at this point where we're having to argue about it. It's an interesting dance.
And you mentioned the awareness. So some of the things that we've done is, well, when we get to have opportunities like this to be able to talk about it,
Sure.
It's to help raise the level of awareness. We talk about it at a lot of our meetings to raise the level of awareness. But it's happening, whether we like it or not. These mega projects are mandating this type of head protection. So if we want the work, and you want to go to work, and you want to take care of your family, you got to accept it and do it,
Right.
and not let that look stand in the way of a paycheck.
Of course, right.
The other thing, we've also had one of our members, Ike Pritchett. We put together a video. His life was saved as a result of wearing one of the new style of head protection. So we've been pushing that video out to our membership, and I actually showed it this week and during my session, and it went over pretty well. I'd be happy to share that link again. But it's an easy watch. It's only a few minutes, but it went into the impact of what happened in that particular instance, and how that, because it had the chin strap and he was wearing it with the strap in place, that when the initial contact happened, it kept it on, and that's what saved his life.
Okay.
So there are really, really good benefits to it. And it's always been that way when you see rock climbers using them. The reason they do it on lead is because there's much more of a possibility of a pendulum fall or a fall where you come back into the wall. These are all things that are common in climbing, and that provides that greater protection for them. And so there's positives and negatives to each system.
Right.
If we combine the two so that they're providing the necessary protection, and then make that aware to the workforce and go, okay, this is what we've been able to accomplish. Now we've got something that will protect you to this level that everybody agrees that's where we want to be. And then secondarily, it's providing all of that alternative use that we need for grinding and welding and all the things that we do in the steel erection industry, that now we've got to win. And that's where we have to get to. That's what we're going to have to do.
Agree wholeheartedly.
Very good, and I know we could probably talk about the helmets for days, but I do want to. There's one other kind of piece of equipment, so to speak, and it's relatively new. Last decade or so. But I wanted to touch on cell phone policies.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in today's age of mental health awareness. I mean, obviously, this was not even an issue. 15 or so years ago, maybe a little longer than that, actually.
It's probably been an issue. It wasn't brought to light.
Right. Phones have changed. I mean, back in the day, you have it in your pocket. You maybe look at it every few hours. Now, everybody wants to look at it all the time, no matter what they're doing.
It's amazing. So, a number of things. Number one is the construction industry has one of the highest rates of death by suicide or substance use disorder, death by overdose of all the industries. So, and unfortunately, based on the data, the iron workers have a disproportionately high rate of members that are lost. And if you look at the OSHA data, and you just average the number of people lost in construction to on the job injuries is about 1,000 a year, roughly. People that are in the construction industry that die by suicide is around 5,000 to 6,000.
My goodness.
And those that die by overdose is around 17,000 that are tied to our industry.
Gavin West actually presented those statistics in one of his sessions in this conference.
It's very sobering.
Yeah.
So here we are. We're focused on head protection and PPE and trying to help protect people when they're on the job, and yet we have people in our industry that are they work really hard. It's a physically demanding job, and their bodies get broken down, and they are traveling a lot. So how do they handle it? They might self-medicate. They may be prescribed opioids that they get addicted to. There are other challenges that they are associated that are also away from home a lot, so they're separated from their family, and all these things kind of compound, and so we're trying to help raise the level of awareness with that. And it's been interesting. You mentioned the cell phone policy, so a lot of these companies, owners and general contractors, trying to do the right thing to try to limit, they might have non-disclosure agreements in their facilities where they prohibit cell phone use. But then I've also been on job sites on these mega projects where certain foremen or site supervision have a hard hat sticker that identifies them as the person who's allowed to have a cell phone on the job, and then everybody else is not. And then they'll turn around and say, but mental health is important. You should really be able to communicate with your family. But I'm not allowed to because I don't have a cell phone.
In fact, can't even bring it in the
gate.
gate.
I can't even bring it into the gate. So I have no way to communicate and have that tether to my family at home while I'm working. And, yet I'm complying with the safety policy, and yet we're focused on mental health, right?
There's a disconnect.
Right.
So there's, again, here a balance. It is well recognized that you do not need to have that distraction when you are performing your work functions in construction. So the policies are, wide-ranging as far as how they're written. But some of the basic things that we've seen that have been successfully along those lines is your cell phone will stay in your lunchbox, or it'll stay with your stuff that you will do at break and at lunch. And then you're now allowed the ability to communicate with your family during those times, or your friends, or whatever else. But then it goes back there and it stays there, so that you're not picking up your cell phone as a piece is coming in from the crane. You don't do that. So that's one of the policies and that's true on the fabrication floors also. So that same policy, which we have in place for all of our fabrication operations, is the same thing. You don't use that when you're doing work. It stays over in your lunch bucket. When you get a break or at lunch, you're able to use your cell phone at that point. That's another one we're going to have to address, because when you isolate any worker from the ability to communicate with their family and friends, you are asking for that same mental health issue to be worse.
Sure.
So there's going to have to be a balance there.
Is it a situation then when? I have a couple questions actually, or one observation. I'll tell you that one first. In some ways, reducing I mean, if it's talking about a communication issue where you're trying to get in touch with your family, that is important. As we know, every single human on the planet likes to doom scroll, what have you. I have, I work in an office. I have the ability to kind of look at the internet whenever I want to. I have to have self-discipline not to do that. But the less screen time in general, I think that is something that affects mental health in a completely different way and probably improves it. But I was going to say, when you're talking about needing to get in touch, is it a situation where you got your phone somewhere else? Does the foreman or somebody have the ability? Are they like the go-to person if, God forbid, there's an emergency at home or something like that?
You can put, in fact, that is one of the beauties, and this is where I get to recognize one of the real strengths of the ironworkers. And I've watched it, being around it for so many years. It truly is a family. And because of that, they look after each other. That is actually built into the ironworkers. So they usually, the family members know who the foreman is, and usually their wives know each other, and they know how to get in touch with their worker, whoever their relative is on the project. And the multi-family members, we have seen upwards of 3 generations, Wayne, as you know, within our own companies. And it's amazing where you see that following continue. Don't really see that issue as long as you have a realistic cell phone policy, not a totally restrictive one. That creates multiple issues for communication, for NCRs, for documentation, communication of issues on projects. When you just ban the use of them at all, you're creating a major issue from a productivity standpoint, from a safety standpoint, and from a general health standpoint. So there needs to be a balance.
Absolutely.
That would be the
But
best thing I could recommend.
Steve hit that because, I think you also have to look at, the ironworker family is our perception of risk is much different than
Yeah.
normal people, right?
Sure.
It's not normal to get up there, 100
No.
stories up in the air and stand out there and reach out to grab a piece and bring it in, right? It's not, normal people wouldn't do that.
No.
So
That's why they're so unique.
So that's so the perception of risk. So
Right.
when
It's
you're telling someone, hey, when you're sitting here and you're walking and doing this on your phone, you don't see that as being a risky activity or a risky behavior.
Right.
But yet, if you talk to people in the oil and gas industry or some other industries, that is absolutely prohibited. You do not do that.
Right.
And so what's happening is you have people that are leaving maybe the oil and gas industry, coming over to the construction industry, working on these mega projects. They're putting policies in place like that we don't perceive that as being a risky behavior.
Sure.
Because our perception is, look at what we're doing all day long, and we work
Yeah.
with this, and not making it right, but you're going to pick on me about this when I've got how many thousands of tons over here that I've been swinging in and out of the job all day, so
It's a different concept. But again, I think the answer there is balance.
Sure.
That, yes, we can have successful cell phone policies that allow all of the things that we need from them, but be realistic. And, I've actually watched this before. Connector in the air, phone rings, he reaches in his belt and picks it up, and I'm like, what are you doing?
Wow.
So that, Wayne, it happens.
Exactly. Yep.
And so,
Right.
that we have to be realistic. You don't need to be using your cell phone
Sure.
or having it on your person when you are doing your tasks. That needs to stay over there in your lunch bucket.
No, 100%. Yeah. No, it's just like you were saying with the helmets too, like going from the traditional type 2 to type 2 or type 1 to type 2. It is a balance of, the
Yeah.
best of both. We're trying to find the best of both worlds there. And then you could probably apply that to most safety topics. So,
You can.
yeah. Gentlemen, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank you so much for your time, Steve and Wayne. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching, everybody. Be safe.